everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's program, Caretakers of the Land, History of Land and Water in the San Xavier Community with Dr. Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan. I'm Maggie Onosorgan, the Public Programs Manager here at the Ameren Museum. And before we begin our program today, I would like to acknowledge that the Ameren is located in southern Arizona on lands where the O'odham, Hopi, Oshwe, Yoeme, and Apache families have lived for untold generations, and whose wisdom and traditions live on today in vibrant communities. We are grateful for what all of these communities, rich in history, have to teach us. We would also like to thank our donors and members who enable the Ameren to provide this free online program and fulfill Ameren's mission to foster and promote the knowledge and understanding of the Native peoples of the Americas through research, education, conservation, and community engagement. To learn how you can assist the Ameren in supporting its mission and programs by becoming a member or donor, please visit ameren.org. Please also join us on Saturday, October 28th, when Dr. Millicent Michelle Pepion will talk on Arizona's creation story, important treaties and executive orders regarding the Native nations and the Arizona Territory from 1846 to 1912. And for those of you who come out to the Ameren, we would like everyone to know that next Saturday on October 7th, we will be opening our Texas Canyon Nature Preserve to the public with over 8 miles of new self-guided walking trails. You can now hike and explore the beautiful landscape. We will open on the 7th with a grand opening and open house starting at 9. There'll be wagon rides, hikes, nature lectures. Yeah, come out if you get a chance and check out our new trails. So for more details on other upcoming events and how to register for the online programs, please visit our website, ameren.org/events. And today, if you'd like to ask Jacelle any questions, please type them in the Q&A box and I'll gather those at the end of her presentation for her to answer. And also a link to today's recording will be sent to all the registrants and also be available to view at your leisure on our YouTube channel. So today we're very pleased to have Dr. Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan as she shares her knowledge about the history and culture of her people. She is Tohono O'odham from the San Xavier District. She serves as faculty in the Tohono O'odham Studies Program at Tohono O'odham Community College. She recently earned her PhD in American Indian Studies with a minor in journalism at the University of Arizona this past May. Her research focuses on the history of land and water in the San Xavier District. And she has written for news publications across the US, including Indian Country Today. Ramon-Sauberan is also a communication specialist for the National Science Foundation's NOIRLab, closely working with Kitt Peak National Observatory. So please welcome Dr. Jacelle Ramon-Sauberan.
Thank you, Maggie. And it's really great to be here with you all today. I always am excited any chance I get to share my dissertation research and talk about my community and where I come from. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll get started. All right, so this is actually a photo which you see in my background and also on the screen here of the farm fields that are part of the San Xavier Cooperative Farm within the San Xavier District. And this is just on the north side of the San Xavier del Bac mission. And you'll see some really great photos throughout the presentation. I do want to acknowledge my community, the San Xavier community, also the district, the San Xavier Cooperative Farm, the San Xavier Alati Association, and my family for helping me. Without all of the organizations and my family, this presentation wouldn't have been possible. My research wouldn't have been possible. It was really community-based research. And, from the very beginning all the way to the very end, really having my community not only support but be there every part of the way. And my auntie, Julie Ramon Pearson, was a big part of that. And, there was a need in my community to write this information down. We are an oral society and we have been for time immemorial, but again, noticing and also just having conversations with different community members, and also getting the okay for us to write this information down. And I still had an oral part to it. I did do audio recordings when I did interview community members and others that are knowledgeable about the history of land and water in San Xavier. And so but again, putting it all together in a document is something that is the first of its kind. And this is really the start to my lifelong history of research that I want to do. A history meeting talks about, where I come from and my relatives, and I learned, quite a bit along the way. So just wanting to state that at the very beginning here. All right, so before we dive into really talking about the San Xavier community, I did want to share a little bit about early life of O'odham. And you can see on this map here, this dark kind of gray blue area that indicates where our ancestors, the Hohokam, lived. And they lived along the Gila River, the Salt River, and also the Santa Cruz River. And so, they were a prehistoric North American tribe that lived between 200 to 1450 AD. And they occupied a big area, of which I just talked about, from South Central Arizona, from Flagstaff to the Mexico border, mainly along the different rivers. Because, in the desert, you got to be smart and you got to know where your water sources are. And so, that is why I always share this, because it plays a big part in who we are from San Xavier. And so the word Hohokam, and sometimes it's spelled Huhukam, but it's O'odham, and it means those who are no longer here, or simply referencing our ancestors. Whereas you see in the map, it says Hohokam, and that is the anthropological way of saying, not only referencing a group of people, but also a time period and also a specific area. And so, also from our, what we learned and what was carried on from our ancestors into our traditional early life, we were semi-nomadic. We were also river or hunters and gatherers, and it all depended on where you lived. And so there are different groups of O'odham, and so there were some like Kiachet O'odham, which translates to sand people. They roamed and they moved a lot, so they were hunting and gathering, and they were going down to different areas, and I meant going down to into present day Mexico, to go to the ocean. They were coming up north. And, whereas for, say, San Xavier, where I come from, we, it depends on who you talk to, but I believe we're river and also desert people, because yes, we had the Santa Cruz River when it was flowing as a river source, a water source. But then also too, we had our mountains, we had our desert. So, and we situated ourselves nicely between where our sacred mountains are and then the river. And then others, they traveled, and in terms of, not roaming, but living in two different homes. And so it all depended on the seasons, it depended on the weather and where, they moved. And so these were field villages or well villages. And so again, knowing where, for example, your well village that you would have, knowing where to be able to collect water, whether it was a waterfall that you knew of or being able to catch water. And the field villages, they were where you would farm and, be able to have those spring, summertime, and catching water from the monsoon rains, to do auction farming, which is a traditional farming technique that we have. And so, just giving you a little bit of background. And then also, oops, this slide kind of got a little messed up. With this is just talking about the names of O'odham, and so Tohono O'odham means desert people. And prior to 1986, and when we had change within our tribal government structure, we did go by the name Papago, and that was originally given to us by Father Kino when he came and we had contact with him. And the name Papago derives from a Spanish word that means bean eater, because one of our main staples of food is tepary beans, and we have 3 different types of tepary beans that are still grown and harvest and eaten today. And so and just a little note, because this does come up, we do not go by the name Papago, and but we do understand that there are books and there are references that, for example, like Papago Woman by Ruth Underhill, but just something to share. And then also the name Pima, that was also given when Father Kino came, because when he arrived here, of course, language was an obstacle, and to be able to communicate with us, but he thought there was no way that O'odham living in San Xavier area could be also O'odham and be related, in the same people that were living up by the Gila and Salt River. And so thus giving them a different name. But prior to contact, we were all one people, and we were, consider ourselves O'odham, and we still consider ourselves O'odham today. But, we are federally recognized individually. And so we call ourselves sister tribes today. And so you have Gila River Pima and Salt River Pima tribes, and they're considered Akimet O'odham, but those 2 are federally recognized. And then Auction O'odham, which is mouth of the wash people, in reference to the auction farming, the traditional technique, they're also fairly recognized. Where Hiachet O'odham, they were umbrellaed under the Tohono O'odham Nation, but they're on their own now, and they are trying to seek out federal recognition, but currently they are not, federally recognized. And just to highlight here this photo, I always try to include old photos, and this was actually a postcard that was sold in Tucson, and this is my grandma, and this is my Auntie Julie, and this is my great grandmother. And so this would have probably been 1949 or so, and they're walking in downtown Tucson. And so as we get into start talking about the Santa Cruz, and also talking about the history of land and water in San Xavier, I made a point during my research to go and find photos. So I went to Arizona Historical Society, and also looked through old photos that my grandma had, and just searching around. And so I found some really great photos because I really wanted to give people visuals of what it looked like once upon a time, because even in my lifetime, the Santa Cruz, and thinking of it and how it used to look, it was always just I couldn't imagine it, because I used to hear stories from my grandma, and she used to talk about how lush and green, and how these big cottonwood trees and willow and mesquite, but that's not how I've known what the Santa Cruz looks like, right? And so the only time it runs is when it rains, and a lot of times you see photos from Arizona Daily Star, when they do their time capsule photos, and these photos made it look like at times there was this big raging roaring river, but that was because of the rain and monsoon rains. And so seeing it though, as it was being this narrow, windy river. And in O'odham, we call it Ariakamel, so like a small river. And so you can see it here as it's winding and twisting and turning as it moved through Tucson. And so, as I mentioned before, a big part of this is also was learning about my family. And because I need to know this information, and always growing up, I had questions about the history, and also understanding why, there was a San Xavier Lati Association, and why people who were landowners in San Xavier, were upset about this issue, or different things growing up. But I would talk to my mom because she goes to those meetings, and I still was like, oh, okay, but I didn't understand the full spectrum of what was going on, because I didn't have the full history. And so up until me putting my paper together, it was people would have to go talk to individuals like my Auntie Julie, and others to piece it together. And so that's what I did. I looked at it as this puzzle piece, and getting bits and pieces from different people, and my auntie really being the foundation of that puzzle, but others filling in other gaps. And and then even for myself, having these aha moments at times where I'm like, okay, I understand now. Like, I get why this is the way it is, and it was really exciting for me. But the drive though really is or was and continues to be my family. And so my great grandparents, Frank and Anselma Rios, they had this house, this farmhouse, and it's no longer standing. It's just the foundation of it. But they had their farm, and they were very successful. And it was actually really funny because I was doing a research paper for my master's, and I'd always heard stories about my great grandfather, Frank, and I'd never seen a picture of him until I was doing that paper, and I was looking in a couple different books. And this photo that you see up at the top here, with the other men standing around, there's two photos. And I found that photo, and I was sitting there reading the caption, and I was like, is this, my great grandfather? And so I took a picture and I sent it to my mom, and my mom said, yes, that is. And it was amazing because I'd never seen him before, but for him to be highlighted because of how successful he was at farming, and you had individuals come out, non-O'odham and O'odham, to understand what what he was doing, how successful, how he was being successful, and what was like his secret. And so that was really awesome to see. And then but sharing these, and highlighting what life was like in San Xavier at one point in time, because everybody farmed, and the little girl is my grandma, and she was born in 1923. So we still haven't figured out, how old exactly she was in this photo. So maybe late 1920s is when this photo was taken. And these are some of her brothers. But she was one of, I believe it was 12. And so, and this other photo too of her is a little girl and squash that my great grandfather would grow. And as she got older, and she became a grandma, and I remember having fond memories of going to her house, and she always had squash sitting next to her. And then after she had passed, this is when a lot of these photos, we found them, and I started to make copies and whatnot. And I found this photo, and I said, no wonder she always had squash by her. But and squash is one of our other traditional foods, like I was talking about with tepary beans, that is still grown today and it's very delicious. And so, but again, always highlighting this, and this meaning my family and my ties to this topic and my research that I did. And so these are some other photos too of the Santa Cruz. And my grandma would always tell me stories too, because she remembers when she was little that the Santa Cruz at the time was still running. And so this is, what she described to me, and the visual that I always had in my head was just this picture right here where you can see that people are washing their clothes, and so of course collecting water, and women would carry the water on their heads back to their house, or maybe to neighbors who asked for water, but also too was a place to go and you know utilize and wash your clothes and do what you need. And my grandma says she remembers growing up when she was little, and she would be playing, and the women would be down there taking care of chores, and so I found this and I said, wow, this is exactly what my grandma used to talk about and tell me. And so, and also too, this other photo just highlighting how tall the riverbed, and the walls used to be at one point in time, because there is erosion today, but again, having this photo show how narrow and skinny, the river was. And so another part to this too is knowing our ancestral lands, is O'odham, and which are very similar to our ancestors, the O'odham, and showing this visual, because this little square right here is San Xavier, but there are 4 parcels that make up the Tohono O'odham Nation today, and San Xavier was the first, and that was established in 1874. Then you have a second parcel in Gila Bend, which is San Lucie district, and that was in the late 1880s. And then the main part of the nation right here, which is this big square, it was in 1920s. And then we have a small little parcel, about 40 acres, that was given to us by the city of Florence. And so those 4 parcels make up the 2.8 million acres. And this main part too right here is the size of the state of Connecticut. And also wanting to highlight and mention that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo and the Gadsden Purchase are what led to our ancestral land being split in half, as you see here. And then it also had quite impacted us in terms of our people and where they live, because then with the creation of the US-Mexico border, we didn't have a say, we didn't know about it. And so when it was created, the people living on what is now in Mexico, our tribal members, they became Mexican citizens, and then those living on the north side became US citizens. And it's something that we have struggled and continue to fight when it comes to border issues. And so but it being important to know that these different parcels, and when they were created, because that is why for San Xavier is the only part of the Tohono O'odham Nation that went through allotment. And so our history in San Xavier is a bit different, because for one, we went through allotment, and second, having the Santa Cruz River, as a water source. And, so both of those things really play a big role in our history. And again, that's why it's a little bit different than the other parcels that make up the Tohono O'odham Nation. And so today we are one community, but long ago, we used to have several different communities in San Xavier. And so this is a modern map with those communities placed where they used to be. And so the mission is in the heart of San Xavier, but also too, we call San Xavier WAK. It's WAK:K. And that is in reference, and it translates to where the water goes in because of the aquifers that are in the Santa Cruz River Basin. And so you can see here these different communities that were in San Xavier at one point in time. But then also too, you see this word oitak, which means fields. So there's fields throughout too, throughout the community. But then eventually we all came together and formed as one community. But I like sharing this because of the different names. So for example, many badgers, many goats, many ants, mouse sitting, and mouse nose. And so I shared a little bit about this already, about my dissertation and just how important it was for me to put this together. And certainly it was hard. I will say that. And especially, trying to do research through a pandemic, and also too losing individuals. And I was able to interview 2 individuals before they passed away, but there was others that I had wanted to interview too and didn't get a chance before they passed away. But I'm really glad that the 2 individuals that I did get to talk to, their words and their knowledge is able to be heard and live on through my research. And so talking about allotment, as I mentioned, 1874, San Xavier Indian Reservation is established. There's no other reservation at that time that's established. And so, you see in 1887 is when the General Allotment Act, or the Dawes Act, was created. And it was an assimilation attempt. And government thought, well, we should put Native Americans, in parcels. And, we want them to be farmers, ranchers, or harvesters of timber. And so this will help civilize them. And so for us, at the time this was signed in 1887, allotment happened only 3 years later in San Xavier. And so through different conversations I've had with others, I said, well, why do you think that is? And really pondering and thinking about it. But the conclusion I came up with, and in my opinion, it's because the government didn't have to really do much. They were just literally going to come and divide our land up and say, okay, this is where your parcel of land is. This is where your parcel of land is. And it was all based on the size of your family. So that's why it ranged from 40 to 160 acres. And so that, they looked at it as if, oh, this is going to be quick and easy because we're not teaching them a new way of life. Whereas other tribes, that's what they were doing. They were telling them to completely forget everything they had done up to this point, and they were going to be farmers. They were going to be ranchers, or harvesters of timber. And so for us, what do we have been doing for time immemorial? We were farmers. So they came in 1890, they meaning the government, and they allotted 41,000 acres. And that's about half of the San Xavier district boundaries. And there were 292 allotments given. And the thing with that is there's this misconception that everybody in San Xavier is a landowner today. And it's only people from San Xavier, but that's not true. It didn't matter if you were from San Xavier or not. If you got in line that day to get a parcel of land, and you could have been from, a different village community, you were given land. And that was the case for some families. But then also too, how land ownership works is that, it gets passed down from, so say like now my mom is a landowner, or as we say, a latte. And so when she passes away, it gets then divided between me, my brother, and my sister. And so you see, as time goes on and these next generations, it gets fractionated. And so, what started out with one individual having 160 acres today for one of their parcels, and you could now have, 100 people in with interest in that 160 acres. And so today there's 1,800 allottees, and it may be more now, but that's the number with interest in these allotments. And so and that's something too, that it gets very complex and complicated, because also too, another part of it is like, yes, it can get passed down, but then say you don't have any children, you don't have next of kin. So then, but you have a living spouse and they're not from San Xavier, then that can go to them. Or, so again, it depends on the scenario situation, but, so you have landowners, allottees today that are from all across the Tohono O'odham Nation and from all the different villages and communities. And so, that was the start of it. And also too, with allotment, yes, it was assimilation, but also too was to introduce individualism to us, which is a foreign concept, because you can describe us as being communal, or as I used in my research, and as relationality. So having these relationships with your neighbors, your relatives, and really being there for one another, which we did. We always took care of each other. And at the time allotment was created, I'm sorry, these parcels were created, it really didn't affect us. We just kept farming and we kept doing what we had been doing. And it wasn't till later that things started to change, because around the 1900s, we started to see the depletion of the Santa Cruz River start. And, it wasn't completely dry. It wasn't dry until about 1940s, but that was something that we started to pay attention to, because then you started to see different areas around us start to grow. You started to see farmers come in, and of course, Tucson started to grow. And so with that, that was really, again, something on our radar that we had to pay attention to, but we just kept farming. And so this is the map of San Xavier District boundaries. And so this right here, if you're familiar, this is Mission Road. And then this is I-19 right here. And so all of these are the allotments. And the green is our tribal lands, which are our district and our government that we have for the district. They are the ones that are in charge of this, the part that's in green. And so this is also just a really great photo of what San Xavier looked like at one point in time. And so then, as I talk about water issues and bringing it up, of noticing, the water levels of the Santa Cruz River. And so, and my great grandfather utilized the canal systems of our ancestors, the Hohokam, which created very intricate, very, structurally sound canals. He used those to carry water from the Santa Cruz River to our family farm, and so, but again, paying attention. And that's one of the things that's part of our himatag, our way of life, is that we're made from this earth. So we have direct connections to the plants, to the animals, to the food that's grown, to the water, and so, that again was something that our community, we talked about, and being a community, we had our meetings that we'd come together. We still have those meetings today to address concerns and talking about, what to do about them. And so once the water was depleted farming became something of the past for us. And that was really hard because that had been our livelihood. We traded with one another, food, we made sure everybody was taken care of, and for that to just be gone like that, that was really, impactful on us. And also too, as I mentioned, our himathug, our way of life, that also, when it comes to our beliefs and our values, also not only being connected, but also knowing to only take what you need. And so here we are, being able to sustain and have this water source, the Santa Cruz River, flow, for as long as we know. And then you have individuals come in that don't have that same mindset of only take what you need, and then the water's gone with a blink of an eye. And so that, again, was something really hard for us, and we were a bit lost. And so, being landowners, there were some individuals that did lease their land to non-O'odham farmers in different parcels. But those farmers at that time used chemicals, pesticides, and hurt our land. And it wasn't discovered till years later. But before I get into that, after quite some time, my community got together and said, we need to do something. We don't want to let our traditional ecological knowledge be lost. We need to figure out how we can bring farming back. So one of the things that the community did was that in 1971, they created the San Xavier Cooperative Farm, known as the co-op. And it was a way for us to piece our land back together that had been divided because of allotment, and we decided that, we were going to have this area within the community with these parcels pieced back together to create the co-op and be able to farm. And that's what you see today if you've ever been or passed the Santa Xavier Cooperative Farm. And so, that took time too, because this idea was formed, people all agreed, but then having to go and collect signatures from all of the individuals, who all of them said yes. My family was on that list. I think it was 46 allotments that had to get approval. And there's only one elder still living from those meetings, and his name's Clifford Pablo. And amazing individual with so much knowledge. And I was really glad that I was able to get to know him, and I've interviewed him and talked to him, throughout the years. And so, he shared original documents with me about this. And his time of, he was like, I was assigned to do this. He's like, I didn't know. He's like, half these people, he's all, but I had help from others. And he's like, we got the signatures. And it was him that discovered that there had been chemicals and that our land was hurt, and he healed it. He healed our land and brought it back to life. And he's the reason really why the co-op is what it is today. He started it all, and he went around for years, fixing and repairing, and he'd be out there with his kids and they'd be helping him. And so, and he had people, he said, that came and went to help him too, to do this, but it was really, him that got the co-op to be, again, what it is. And it's been around since the 1970s. And so then, another, and this is Clifford, and this is the list, the original list too. He just pulled this out, and I tell this story a bunch, but it was just amazing. And I was talking with him at his house, and he's like, yeah, he's like, I think I have the list somewhere. And then he pulls this out, And as you see at the top right here, those are rust from the staples, and almost felt like I should have like archive gloves on touching it. But he let me take it and make copies. And again, it was really awesome to see my family members' names on this list, you know. And so but again, you know, it was this opportunity, you know, to learn more. And and I love interviewing. Journalism is my first passion. So, you know, just sitting there and hearing all these different stories was amazing, because all of this is before my time, you know. And so this is what the co-op looks like today. And also too, you know, these are some of the foods that are harvested or grown at the co-op. And this is my grandma, and she's actually eating wild sugar cane. But I like to show this picture because this is what the co-op looked like at one point in time, and it's just dirt, you know. And so these are the white tepary beans, the red tepary beans, and this is mesquite flour. So from the mesquite beans, they can be milled and then made into flour. And they're really, it's really just awesome to bake with. And so from that, so we create the co-op, right? And we're piecing land back together and making sure that we're able to continue farming, or really start farming back up, but then also making sure that our traditional ecological knowledge is continued and, you know, it's not lost. But then also too, what are we going to do about water? So in 1975, we the San Xavier Alatis, my community, decided that we needed to hold those accountable for the depletion of the Santa Cruz River and also our aquifers. And so there was 2 different lawsuits filed, a couple from Alatis, one of which was one of my grandmas filed a lawsuit. But then just because of legality and, you know, looking at things, it was determined that it would be better if the Tohono O'odham Nation filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Latis and San Xavier. And so that's what happened. And so the lawsuit was to hold City of Tucson, agricultural businesses, the copper mine, because the Sarco copper mine is just south of the San Xavier District. And also they use some of the allotted land. It was leased to them. That's a whole different story. And wanting them to, again, understand what they did and what they caused. And so that took quite some time. And it wasn't easy because there was a lot of back and forth. And at one point in time, it actually got denied by Ronald Reagan. And so Morris Udall stepped up and said, no, you can't deny this. And so Morris and Stuart Udall were allies of the Tohono O'odham, and Stuart helped us in making sure that we were still able to harvest our sorrel fruit in Sorrel National Park area. And so Morris stepped up to help us in this way of, you know, and it's funny because how it's described is that he sent off a fiery letter to, and I like that wording, to Reagan. And so then, you know, Reagan came back and said, okay, well, you need to do XYZ in order for me to sign off on this. And so that did happen. And in 1982, the Southern Arizona Water Rights Settlement Act was passed. And then, however, though, in 2004, there were amendments that were made to SWARSA. And that's the acronym for Southern Arizona Water Rights Settlement Act. But, you know, it was one step in the right direction of holding these individuals accountable, but also too, you know, having one step in the right direction for us to have water, for us to farm, for us to, you know, begin our sharing of our traditional ecological knowledge. And so there are still things within SWORSA that are being dealt with today. And so, but with the passing of it in 1982, it did bring the Central Arizona Project waters to Tucson and to San Xavier. And today, the San Xavier Cooperative Farm, that is their main water source, is CAP. And so from this, though, you know, it did create some other foundational organizations like the San Xavier Lati Association, also to some foundational documents within my community too, you know, because all of this we had never dealt with anything of this sort, you know, and really grateful for different folks that were knowledgeable to come and step up and help us, you know, and guide us in this lawsuit. And so these are some of the photos. This is my grandma right here with one of her friends, Sally Estrada. And then this is my other grandma here. This is, so in O'odham way, this is my grandma. This is her sister, so she's also my grandma. And so it was really cool to find some of these articles. And so the last part of this too, and is that, so okay, so we have the creation of San Xavier Co-op Farm to bring back farming. We file this lawsuit to then have water, you know, having the CAP waters come to San Xavier, but that wasn't done overnight. That took some time. So it wasn't until, I believe, 19 years later that we finally actually had water flowing, you know, the pipes where everything were done. But we also had in the late 1970s a land development that was proposed in San Xavier. And so this was actually going to be a city of 100,000. And there was a developer that came, Jim Rothschild, and he was in charge of the Santa Cruz Properties Incorporation. And he wanted O'odham to lease land for the creation of this city of 100,000. And there was a lot of things that were done with this land development that shouldn't have been done. And first and foremost, he should have came to the Latis, but instead was, you know, trying and also be truthful because it was told to us that you know, we'd become millionaires and, you know, this was a really good thing to do, and, you know, which wasn't true. If you read the fine print, it wasn't true. We weren't going to become millionaires. But it was a 6-phase development proposal with a 90-year lease. And so it would have been 18,000 acres, 16,000 acres belonged to Alatis, and then 2,000 of those acres were being held by the San Xavier District. And so by no means was this going to be designed or be for O'odham. It was for others. And so you can see this map here of what it would have looked like. And I couldn't even fathom, you know, being by the church and looking south to see all of this there. And so there was, again, things that were done that weren't handled properly. And it really divided our community. And so Rothschild gained approval from everybody else except for the main source, which was a Latis. And actually, one of my uncles happened to be at a meeting and they were talking about the approval of this land development. And he was just like, what approval? And so then, you know, after that, he went to my grandma, and then it just spread like wildfire around the community. And people were mad. And people were like, what is this? That nobody consulted us. Nobody came to us. And so again, unfortunately, people saw dollar signs and were, you know, persuaded. And so it really created a lot. of I guess you could say issues, and it really tore us apart. And so then so we were put here from our creator Iitoi to take care of the land, to be caretakers of the land. And so being owners and introducing this land ownership concept and individualism to us is not how we live our lives. And so also with this, again, having that reminder of our himathug and why we're here, and what was told to us by our creator. And so that's where it divided, because people needed money. They needed money to be able to provide for their families, and they thought, oh well, great, this would be awesome. Where others said, well, no, hold on, let's really look at this and read it. So it took from the 70s, when this was first introduced, all the way till almost probably like what it says on the end of 1980s, to really have this idea squashed. And that was never going to happen, and it was something, again, that was very historical for us, because if it would have happened, again, look what it would have created, and there would have been broken promises there, just like within American Indian history when it comes to treaties. And so but there were those that never gave up, and there was an organization, Defenders of O'odham Land Rights, that was created, and they stuck with it. And they had help from outsiders, even went for themselves. They went to Pima Community College to educate themselves, so they would know how to better handle this situation. And they fought and they fought and they fought. And one of the individuals that passed away, he was able to share his time with this, because he was at the forefront of this organization and not making this pass. And so it was something really to hear about and listen, and find out all the different individuals that were involved in this, and talk to them. And so that was something else too that was going on. So it was like one thing after another after another. And a lot of the people that were part of making those being held accountable, also to piecing the land back together, they were part of this too. And I really think that this was activism, being born in San Xavier through these different issues. Because like I said before, with allotment, we were just like, okay, and we continued on. But then when these other, like the water started to get depleted and these other issues came up, we had to step up and make sure that our voices were heard. And we were there to stand up. So these are some of the articles that I found over time. And then to end with my presentation, so through all of these different things that took place in San Xavier when it comes to land and water issues, I never thought in my lifetime that we would be able to see the Santa Cruz run again. We was always talked about something in the past, but in 2018, 2019, the water, one of our aquifers, started to flow again, and all on its own. We haven't done anything other than monitor it. And so it's a true blessing for us to have this. And these were taken this past spring. And so it does kind of pop up and flow for a certain amount of time, and then it disappears again, just like our O'odham name walk, where the water goes through. And so that was something I thought was really awesome, and that was within my time of my graduate school and my PhD journey. And so for us to talk about it in the past and then, you know, switch to then talk about it in the present of it flowing again is something that's really awesome. And all of the vegetation you see is grown on its own. So it's amazing with what a little bit of water, what can grow in our Juwadaga, our land in the desert. And so with that, that is, excuse me, the end of my presentation. So happy to take questions.
Hang on there. I just lost the screen. Hold on.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Here we go. You do have some questions, so let me get to them. Okay. We go from the start. So someone was asking who was taking these wonderful photos of your family members going back.
Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know. And that's also another hard thing too, when I was looking at the photos at the Arizona Historical Society, where they may have information of who donated the photos and what year they were donated, but not knowing the year of when the photos were taken.
Right.
Yeah, so that was something. But there were a couple photos that I did come across at the Arizona Historical Society that I was able to help them with a date, because I was looking at the photos and I noticed my great grandmother's home. And so then I shared it with my mom, and my mom's like, oh yeah, she's like, this would have been, and then she gave me you know, a kind of a time frame of when the photo would have been taken. And then my mom went on to name in that photo every person's who lived in that house. So that was really something awesome. And so I emailed them and I said, hey, this is what I found. And so that was something that was really awesome that I was glad I was able to help with. But yeah, I don't know. Those photos were just found in my grandma's things, you know, well, after she passed away.
So we have one from Jennifer. Do the O'odham people in Mexico still use the name, or do they go by a different name?
Use Papago as a name?
O'odham.
Oh yeah, no, they call themselves O'odham. In some cases, they do refer to themselves, not everybody, but some have referred to themselves as Sonoran O'odham because of where they live. But yes, they are O'odham, and we have about 2,000 O'odham that are living in Mexico, and they are enrolled tribal members. And they can cross through we have our own port of entries, because there's 75 miles of the US-Mexico border that goes through the main part of our reservation parcel. And they can cross those to come into CELS, which is our capital, to utilize any tribal resources they would like. Also too, there have been some of our departments that have gone to is it Lukeville port of entry to meet with tribal members too, to you know, if they got to turn in paperwork or they need to talk to somebody about enrollment, you know, anything like that. So they've been doing that over the last I don't know how many years.
And we've got somebody who raised their hand. So Kathy, we're gonna allow her to talk.
Okay.
Kathy, go ahead.
I think you're talking to me, actually. I've always been confused about Huhugam versus Hohokam.
Yeah, I shared at the beginning that Huhukam, that is how we call our ancestors. That's actually not the word, and that's how we refer and what we call our ancestors. Hohokam is anthropological, or even with archaeological. That's how they refer to the Huhukam, our ancestors, but it's also in reference to not only a group of people, but an area of land and also a time period.
Okay, let me get back to the question. So one from Karen, she had asked first about the allotment, and then she had a follow-up. How did the individualism of allotments impact traditional O'odham culture? You kind of went into that.
So it has and it hasn't. I think originally when the parcels were created and you know, we went on living our lives like we always had, you know, it was, and there was just lines, you know, that were drawn, and it didn't mean anything to us. But then I feel like today, though, it does matter. And because of just how times have changed, that there are people that are more so, I guess they follow individualism when it comes to the land, because up until a certain point, there was no compensation for these families that leased their land to the San Xavier Co-op farm. And so now there is payouts that happen and that go to these families, you know, or those that have interest within the parcels that are within the co-op's boundaries. So, you know, again, at first it was just like, yes, let's do this as a community. But then things did change where people said, well, I want to be paid for this, you know. And so I think you can see it in different ways. And then also too, you know, it when it comes, like I said, it's complex and it's complicated when it comes to land ownership and what that means, that whole idea of ownership, because again, we are put here to care for the land, not own it, care for it. So I think that's hard. And then you have families that are that can, you know, fight over parcels, because everybody has to be in agreement, you know, of what the land is used for. And sometimes families can't come to an agreement. So that gets to be really hard. You know, if somebody wants to do, you know, build a home on a parcel, you know, and so but again, I don't think that the individualism was really, it really impacted us until more modern times, when it came to you know, really understanding what it meant to be a landowner. And you know, people do individually stand up for different proposals now, when we do have Santa Vera Lati Association have biannual meetings, you know, so people are able to get up and voice their opinions and, you know, vote against different things. And so that's them individually doing that, you know. So
Great. So another question from Marilyn. Did some Alatis not farm and just let the land be fallow?
yeah, so if you, that map I showed, you know, there's only if you look at it, there's only a certain area of like where the co-op farm is exactly. But also too, there were allottees that leased their land to the Sarco copper mine. And unfortunately, that land is not viable anymore because of the chemicals from the mine tailings. So that is just essentially dead land that, you know, again, we can't do anything with. But there's also other parcels too that, yeah, for whatever reason, you know, the family just has the land. There's also other parcels where people actually live on. And so it just depends and it varies.
So let me do one more question as we're running out of time. Here's a good one from Les. Thank you for the history of the land and the water. What is the vision for the future of San Xavier Co-op Farm with Central Arizona program water shortages?
That's a really good question. And I was supposed to actually present to the San Xavier Co-op Farm a couple weeks ago, but due to scheduling, we had to reschedule for later in October. But yeah, that's one of the questions that I really want to talk to them about, because we have some really good people that are in charge of the farm now. One of which, well, two actually, that are running things now. They worked under Clifford Pablo, and so they are, you know, to me, I see it as full circle, because after Clifford left the co-op farm, there was nothing but non-O'odham that served as farm manager. And then I believe it was last year, I could be wrong, I think it was last year, we did have another O'odham farmer come in as farm manager. And then we also have another like office manager. She's them as well. And so between the two of them, you know, they're bringing Clifford's knowledge back to the farm. And we have our second, you know, Autumn, who's a farm manager, and they're doing some really amazing things. And so I think for a lot of talks I've done, that is the question of what with climate change, you know, with the worries of the CAP and our water, you know, what does that look like for us? And, you know, we've thrived here for time immemorial, and we're very resilient people. So, you know, there's some talk that, you know, definitely going back to our traditional ways of auction farming, but then, you know, again, we're resourceful people. So just I think having those conversations with one another and sitting down and saying, what do we do? Like we did with the creation of the co-op farm, you know, and those discussions are slowly starting to happen, especially with, we have a San Xavier Education Center, and there's a program and talking with our youth, because they are our future leaders. They need to know about, you know, that not only this history, but these topics that are coming up that will be, you know, can and will be impactful, and they're going to be in the driver's seat in these leadership positions and one day. And so, you know, why not start now with having them help, you know, and not, like I said, not only understand, but then what are their ideas? How are we going to combat this? How are we going, you know, to continue? And so again, there's small efforts being made right now that I think will be really helpful in my community. And like I said, also too, I just haven't talked to them at the co-op, which that's one of the questions that keeps coming up for these presentations. So I think I'm going to tell them, I'm like, you need to do like an update or a presentation and share. So then I can tell people, hey, you know, the co-op did this, which they have some really great videos up on YouTube. But yeah, and I talk about that in my closing chapter of my dissertation paper, which is going to be shared with you all. So I'm really excited for you to all have a copy and read it, and please share it with others. I really want it to be an educational resource. And I forgot to I'm sure this will be shared with you in the email, but as we're closing here, this is my contact information, so you can reach me. And I am happy to, you know, have further discussions with you all, you know, especially if we didn't get to your question today. You know, I welcome you to save my information and reach out to me anytime. You know, I love doing these presentations, and I love sharing. And, you know, I want you all to understand too, you know, so if there's something that was a bit confusing, reach out, you know, and I will be happy. If it's easy to explain through email, I will. Otherwise, I'm always like, hey, let's talk, whether it's on Zoom or we can meet up for coffee, you know. I love talking with people. So, but again, I'm sure this will be shared with you, but I just wanted to put it up on the screen.
Thank you so much, Jacelle. Again, like she said, I'm going to share all this in an email, and you had a ton of other questions that we didn't get to. I'll share those with you for you to answer or not. And again, I'll put those links on the email. And I will never, so interesting, I will never look when I go out there at the land the same. So thank you for sharing all of this.
Yeah, of course. And thank you everybody for attending today.
See you next time. Thank you. Bye.